My name is Joyce, and this channel is Medusa Was Found. You can find more of my work at unguruyourlife.com. A private business club, research team, and lifestyle ensemble. Hello and welcome to Medusa Was Framed. My name is Joyce. It is yet another lovely day in St. Augustine, Florida. And today I have another video that has come as a result of my diggings into my Reset Architect series, as it has become. This one directly coming from research for a recent video entitled Carrere and Hastings. It's truly unbelievable how dirty and connected these guys all were. One of the partners of the Gilded Age, mind you, architecture firm of McKim, Mead and White. That's who we're talking about today. White was a pedo, and all of New York society knew it. Even his friend Mark Twain, who wrote about it and him in his autobiography. People are noted for asking, was he more famous for his architecture or for seducing young girls? White was embroiled in what was the first trial of the century. He was shot in public for his dalliances with young girls. The morning after the shooting, the papers full of sensationalist and yellow journalism were filling the streets. The trial was the first time ever in American history that a jury had been sequestered. There had to be 2 trials as a result. And a Hollywood movie. Let's begin. Stanford White was born November 9th, 1853 in New York City to Alexina Mies White and her husband, Richard Grant White. A cranky bohemian who fancied himself an English gentleman, yet studied to be a doctor and passed the bar, but was in fact making a living as a music critic, customs house officer, and Shakespearean lecturer and essayist. He was dynamic, charismatic, and rarely interested in earning enough money to support his small family. But he was embroiled, bountied, glamored in golden connections, and somehow always managed to have the things they needed. Stanford grew up watching his father use charm, charisma, and influenced connections to earn successes instead of dedications to hard work, career, and discipline. Attending public school only to attain basic skills and connections, he left before graduating, deciding he was bound for a career in architecture, and used his father's connections to Louis Comfort Tiffany, yes, the Tiffany, and Frederick Law Olmsted, yes, Olmsted, to grease himself a draftsmanship position with Henry Hobson Richardson. Now that's 3 people to have in your pocket. Tiffany, Olmsted, and Richardson. His drawing skills had been cultivated and inspired by the artistic world he grew up in. His dad was also a painter and artist. Richardson was considered the greatest architect of the day, and the style attributed to him attributed to the things he found became known as Richardson Romanesque. He was a big boy from New Orleans who also apprenticed instead of getting a formal education, and interestingly grew up in the house of a famous architect in New Orleans, James Ferrer. He grew up in one of the houses referred to in another video I have done about the Ferrer family and their influence on New Orleans. He grew up on a house on Julia Street in one of the houses of the Ferrer Folly, row houses that were built during an unstable financial time in the South that ended by bankruptcy of architectural empire builder James Ferrer. During his training with Richardson, White allegedly was involved in some of Richardson's key accomplishments, most notably being Boston's Trinity Church, along with a pairing with a family Frederick Law Olmsted, in the massive project for the Buffalo Insane Asylum, which has recently been reopened as a hotel. I'm not sure if I would want to stay there. Richardson offered White limitless contacts, and his draftsman skills were good enough to attract the attention of other architects and artists. So in 1878, he was able to leave for a year, traveling to different places in Europe to study European and North African architecture under the illusion of studying architecture, though we know he was dependent upon the kindness of strangers and certainly did a lot more than study architecture. When he returned to New York City in 1879, he was billed as flamboyant with elaborate clothing as colorful as his red hair and extensive mustache. He greased his way into the new practice of McKim and Mead, the Skull and Bones educated and École des Beaux-Arts trained architects. McKim, Mead, and White became the absolute Gilded Age masters, so we are told, for New York and beyond. Charles Fallen McKim and William Rutherford Mead. Most noted of this team is the original Penn Station. In fact, there were absolutely hundreds. But these three reset masterminds are also attributed with the Louis Comfort Timpany House on 72nd Street in New York City, the second Madison Square Garden, which was before the current site on the old Penn Station lot. It was mixed use with retail space on the first floor, layers of apartments, and a roof bar and restaurant. Also the Rhode Island State House, the Washington Square Arch, Rose Cliff in Newport, Rhode Island, the Astor Courts Casino in Pinehurst, New York, the J.P. Morgan Library, the Vanderbilt Library in Hyde Park, the Villard Homes, the New York Herald Building, First Bowery Savings Bank, the Century Club, Madison Square Presbyterian Church, the Gould Memorial Library, the First Methodist Episcopal Church of Baltimore, the Cosmopolitan Building, which houses Cosmopolitan Magazine, and many, many more. Stanford White's last creative accomplishment is said to have been Tesla's Wardenclyffe Laboratory and Tower. In 1884, a successful and notable architect, Stanford White married Bessie Springs Smith from a family of colonial elite from Long Island, Smith's Town being named after her ancestors. Their home, Box Hill, became his showplace for the excessive aesthetic he had developed, became known for, and used to ply his robber baron clientele. Their son, Lawrence Grants Smith White, was born in 1887. Between 1879 and 1916, this Gilded Age trio are allegedly credited with over 900 private clubs, hotels, libraries, museums, homes, churches, parks, and casinos. Stanford White was able to sell the lush life he desired and live the lush life he craved. A lion of the society world, he belonged to the most notable private clubs and had a multi-level flat in the Madison Square building, which he had designed. This elaborate and mixed-use property he built served as his in-city apartments, so he didn't have to go all the way home to Long Island every night, but it also became his playpen for his growing satyr tendencies. A lover of the exposed flesh of nubile young burlesque dancers, kept his fascinations brewing, and his Madison Square apartment became his grooming den, with a private back alley door next to the freight entrance for the building next door, FAO Schwartz. Evelyn Nesbit was born Florence Evelyn Nesbit on Christmas Day, 1884, in a small town just outside Pittsburgh. The family moved into Pittsburgh in 1893 when Evelyn was 10. Her father fatefully passed away unexpectedly at age 40 that year, leaving them penniless. Her mother's skills as a seamstress and dressmaker was not steady enough for her to support her two small children, so the three of them became nomads, moving from accommodation to accommodation, or with the children left with trusted friends, while Mother Nesbit took the work she could get. They moved to Philadelphia in 1898. Her mother had secured a steady job at the Wanamaker's department store from the fabric department. She would bring Evelyn and son Howard in to work 12-hour days with her. While working with her mother in the store, an artist happened to notice Evelyn and inquired as to her willingness to pose for him, for which he would pay her. After sitting for the portrait and being paid, she quickly realized that being an artist model was more lucrative and less taxing than 12-hour days at Wanamaker. Her mother noticed this too and started helping Evelyn cough, develop as an artist's model in Philadelphia. Securing a regular job as a seamstress in 1900, Mom moved Evelyn and Howard to New York City with letters of introduction from numerous influential artists in the Philadelphia community. Mother Nesbit began her Svengali role as Evelyn's manager in the Gilded City. James Carroll Beckwith was an instructor of light drawing at the Art Students League. His primary benefactor was John Jacob Astor, who saw a series of works of Evelyn and asked to learn more about her. Between the Art Students League and connections with the robber barons like Astor, Evelyn soon became the most requested model in New York City. She adorned the covers of Vanity Fair, Harper's Bazaar, The Delineator, Ladies' Home Journal, and Cosmopolitan. She enhanced fashion ads, sheet music, beer trays, tobacco packages, pocket mirrors, and the English version of what were the naughty French postcard style of the day, known as mignons. Evelyn would earn $5 for a half day of work. That translates to about $150. And $10 for a full day, about $300. Much better pay than being a seamstress or working in a store. Modeling is tedious, demanding, and exhausting, and I can attribute to that. In a previous life, I too was an artist's model. I was an artist model in San Francisco at all the colleges. I was an artist model in New York City, in Washington, D.C., and in Philadelphia, along with being an extra in television and film. Sitting still is more exhausting than you might think. Through all these artist interactions, she was exposed to dancers too, who were also models, who suggested to her she pursue work on the stage. With their connections to managers and all of her wealthy benefactors and supporters, she became a fast success. The New York Herald ran a 2-page article about her in May of 1902. This darling of fine art was now a lead bill of vaudeville and chorus. The media maven to impress in those days was Edna Goodrich, a friend and connection of Stanford White. She was his handler for showgirls. Edna arranged for Evelyn to join her in a lunch at his den. Evan reported to Mrs. Nesbit this private invitation with an obviously wealthy patron who had invited she and Howard back for lunch, Howard being her brother. Greedy Svengali mother that she was, she jumped at this chance. In no time, Stanford White had arranged for mother and son to make a long overdue visit to friends and family in Philadelphia to usher in Howard's enrollment in the military school there, promising he would see to Evelyn's care himself. As soon as mother and son were on the train and safely on their way, Stanford White arranged for a festive meal to be delivered from Delmonico with champagne. Offered in rooms in his multi-level apartment she had not seen before. Evelyn found herself in his room that had a red velvet swing suspended from the ceiling with ropes ordained with ivy. He asked her to swing and model. She did. There was champagne involved. They ate, and then he took her to another room with a second bottle of champagne. This room was furnished only by a green velvet couch with mirrors on the walls and ceiling. She was asked to change into a yellow satin kimono, which she did, and the second bottle of champagne was opened. Evelyn attests that the next thing she knew is she woke up naked in bed next to a naked Stanford White resting in her own blood. She had been a virgin. She was 14. White quickly began pampering Evelyn to keep her quiet, taking her shopping and providing her a ridiculous weekly allowance of $25, about $850 in today's time. Upon mother's return, he moved mother and daughter into a nearby hotel suite. To increase her modeling and stage career, he spent a considerable amount of money on dental work. Evelyn claims to have grown tired of how dreadfully old, she quotes, White was, being in his late 40s at the time. On top of his fascination waning with their exploring all of his lurid fantasies, it was time for a new girl to groom. Their relationship ended in just about a year. This was confirmed by her stumbling upon his essentially little black book at one point, where he spoke of all of the young girls he had accomplished prior to her and since. On top of all of this are the reminiscences of the great-granddaughter of Stanford White, who published her painful memoirs of what she called a family with sexual predation passed down in the genes, she herself growing up in this legacy of fondling and prepubescent abuse. She and her 5 sisters abused by a father who regularly fondled the girls. She quoted as saying, "Sexual violation was a condition of life in this family." She was passed from father to uncle with lots of cousin sex. Her book is called Architect of Desire and was published in 1996. Mother Nesbit was not supportive of this dissolution. She was a corrupt stage mother all along. Harry Kendall Thaw was born into a Pittsburgh banking and railroad magnate family in 1871. He was the son of Thaw's second wife, Alice Cornelia, who allegedly had smothered his younger brother as she fell asleep nursing him in bed one day. No doubt a coddling matron, her only surviving son grew up elitely protected, plagued by insomnia and mental illness, and without discipline or boundaries of any kind. He quickly mirrored his mother's eruptive, abusive behavior with servants and intolerance among those below his station. Rejected and expelled from private school after private school, he was legacy entered into the University of Pittsburgh, where he brags he studied cockfighting, partying, poker, drinking, and womanizing. Through his father again, he was enrolled in Harvard, where he was soon expelled for immoral practices. Thaw's dad then cut his monthly allowance to a paltry $2,500, about 10 grand today, in hopes that this would curb his son's indulgences, to no avail. Father Thaw died in 1893. 22-year-old Harry inherited $3 million, about $20 million today. Mother Alice went to work hiring a cadre of lawyers to maintain damage control for her now completely unlimited son. There were lots of payoffs for silence, and people were willing to accept the payoffs. Openly bisexual and a tool-equipped top in BDSM, Harry kept his mother and team busy for years. This manipulative, spoiled brat sociopath entered his applications to the Century Club, the Knickerbocker Club, and the Players Club, but all were rejected. The noted BDSM orgy club, known as the Union Club, canceled his only membership after he rode his horse up the steps one day into the Grand Salon. Stanford White was also a long member of all of these clubs including the infamous orgy club, the Union Club, which had just ousted him. A dangerous cycle of paranoid obsession began. Months before, Harry Thaw had arranged a group of showgirls to entertain a group of his similarly kinky male friends. One of these dancers learned of Thaw's cruelty, sadism, and narcissism from another entertainer who had befallen his abuse the night before the gathering, and arranged for the group of girls to instead entertain a group of Stanford White's friends on the rooftop bar of the Madison Square Club. Needless to say, Thaw was enraged when the girls didn't show up. And being a time before cell phones, it was only when he found out from other people where the girls had been and who they had been with. His obsessive paranoia with White now turned into rage, believing White was out to sabotage him. He and White shared such similar lifestyles and appetites, but Thaw could not contain his jealousy over the fact that White had all the power and influence he indeed wanted when coming from nothing, as he did. Both were well-known addicts of cocaine, morphine, and laudanum. Evelyn Nesbit was a headliner on stage and caught the attention of the lustful Harry Thaw. Being of a known name, he used another to introduce himself backstage and kept attending her shows. In a passage of time, he saw that Evelyn was warming to him based on his personality and not his name, so he announced to her who he actually was. She was, of course, aware of the name. Evelyn was no longer involved with White, but remained in contact for professional and artistic issues, as well as care for her mother, which White was assisting with. She mentioned to him, White, what Thaw had done and asked his advice, we are to believe. White certainly knew of him, but not with the obsessive attention that Thaw believed he knew of him. He knew him to be violent, spoiled brat, uncontrollable, disruptive, and undisciplined, and told Evelyn this. He suggested to her that this was not a good pursuit for romance or even for business. Evelyn was interested, however, in the opportunity to secure a stable life for she and her mother. So she kept accepting his backstage gifts and dinners, but she kept her distance. That all changed when appendicitis put Evelyn in the hospital and gave Harry Thaw the opportunity to really work her over. And he did. It was at this time that he was able to meet her mother and woo her as well, gift her as well. Harry was not used to being turned down by women, or certainly women whose company he was offering to pay for. Thaw really grew on Evelyn's mother, who got to know him at the hospital, and she lobbied Evelyn to accept the relationship with him due to the potential for financial stability, even in spite of the warnings of White. Out of the hospital, Evelyn considered the very good point of financial stability and, more interestedly, accepted an offer of a cruise to Paris. And so they went. While abroad, Evelyn realized they were becoming serious and felt the need to explain to this man, who was likely to become her husband, the truth of what had happened with Stanford White, the date rape scenario, as it were. The being a child, though the concept of a child was different then, since there were children laboring at all ages, nonetheless, she felt the need to be upfront. Well, this sent Thaw completely over the edge. She finally agreed to marriage when they came back and moved into the family estate in Pittsburgh, where she was not received as an equal. It was Mother Thaw's home, who ran it like the matriarch she was, with an iron fist. Evelyn had absolutely no say in anything, and so started returning to artistic work as best she could. So with a new wife he held financial control over, and a mother who held emotional control over him, his swirling narcissism and obsession over White ran completely full throttle. He soon believed that the notorious Eastman gang of the gangs of 5 Points had been sent to intimidate and ultimately take him out, since he had married White's conquest. And so he started carrying a gun. Preparing for an extensive tour of Europe, their honeymoon, essentially, the newlyweds came back to New York City for dinner and a show before their steamer was to leave the next day. Dining in a favorite restaurant, they both noticed Stanford White dining as well. And Evelyn could not calm Harry Thaw down, who opted to follow White as he left the restaurant. Ending up at the rooftop club of Madison Square, the Thaws stayed back to watch White's actions. Evelyn apparently grew very weary and tired of what she saw as obsessive, childish behavior, and not particularly wanting to cross paths with White while on the arm of her husband. She left the table, left the room. Perhaps she spoke to a friend. Perhaps she went to the restroom. Who knows? But she left the table, left the open patio area. Harry took this as an opportunity. He walked up to White in the crowded club, close to midnight, while music was playing and dancers were dancing, and shot him, point blank range, twice in the face, one in the shoulder. Only in the shoulder because his body started to fall. Screaming, "You ruined my life! You ruined my wife!" Given this was an elite club, considered the unofficial private club of Stanford White, and full of elite, and that a cabaret was going on at the time, many people thought that this was all part of the show and laughed. But when they realized that Stanford White was actually dying, everyone got up, the place cleared out, and people started talking. June 26th, 1906, Thaw was arrested, taken to the Tombs, where he was jailed, using his money to keep himself comfortable in a brass bed, wearing his own clothes, paying for meals delivered from Delmonico's, and champagne. He was charged with first-degree murder. The trial of the century ensued. This was the heyday of sensationalism. "A woman whose beauty spelled blood and ruin" was one headline. Edison's Nickelodeon movie company produced Rooftop Murder and released it 1 week after the murder. Mother Alice Thaw went against her son's preference to find a legal team that would go with a plea of temporary insanity. Branded in the media as dementia Americana, as a model for the male prerogative to revenge any woman whose sacred chastity has been violated. the first time in U.S. history a jury had been sequestered. The trial began January 23rd of 1907. Jury went into deliberation on April 11th. After 47 hours, realized they were deadlocked. Case was dismissed. The second trial began in January and ended in February of 1908 with a plea of temporary insanity. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity and sentenced to life at Matewan State Hospital for the criminally insane. Health again kept him comfortable. His wife, Evelyn Nesbit, was able to continue her theater work and was supplied a comfortable income as long as she offered favorable testimonies and press interviews during the trial. After the sentencing from the second trial, her support ended. Though few supporters of White came forth during these trials, word around town was a public awakening to what White had actually known to have been a manipulative pedophile. His partners, McKim and Mead, simply repeated, "No comment." As mentioned before, it was Mark Twain's honesty, both in press and in his autobiography, that was the most damning and shocking. However, surprising incidents presented themselves to Thaw's behavior. 2 females and 1 male individually testified of Thaw luring them in 3 different incidents into his hotel room or his rented room that he used as a grooming den, much like White, where there were all of his BDSM attire, riding crops, whips, and assorted other accoutrements and restraints. The landlord of the rented apartment had discovered some of this when Thaw evacuated his apartment before his lease was up most hastily, and she presented them in court. This helped confirm the stories of the 2 women. The young man had been a bellboy who was lured into a room to help Thaw with something in the bathroom, was knocked down, stripped, restrained, and whipped bloody in the bathtub. The scars remained after the wounds healed, which helped prove his case. This not only impacted Thaw's view in the public opinion, but was the reason for the denial of his request for a writ of habeas corpus. The judge stated he was far too perverted to be left to roam free. Finally, a long member of his mother's legal team reluctantly testified as to being an intermediary that paid many tens of thousands of dollars over years to women and men he had abused. Conjugal visits were allowed while he was at Matewan, and this is how the son of Evelyn and Harry was conceived. Russell was born in 1910. The couple divorced in 1915. Evelyn remained successful, became even more successful. In 1913, furious and frustrated at being locked up, he simply walked out of Matewan, where he caught a car into Canada, Shearsbrook, Quebec. Believed planned and paid for by Mother Alice, since one of the members of their defense team just happened to be the future Canadian Prime Minister, Louis Saint Laurent, who kept Thaw safely in Canada, exempt from U.S. extradition. However, in 1915, Thaw was ready to go back to New York to be evaluated in a hospital to be declared sane. In July of 1915, he was and set free. Sensationalist news played on the vice of both murderer and murdered. The moral outcry was so great, President Teddy Roosevelt moved toward newspaper censorship to stop the incendiary stories full of sordid details and all the complaints that were coming as a result of them. Now free and seen as having brought his own insane save and sane release, the public response to him was heated and disapproving. And he didn't help his own cause any, because in 1916, he was charged with the kidnap, beating, and sexual assault of a young Frederick Grump of Kansas City, Missouri, who he had agreed to take in and pay his way to Carnegie Institute in Pittsburgh, where he had familial connections. A room was rented for young Gump to stay in after his arrival on the train in New York City to be dinnered with Thaw. Thaw met him at Penn Station, taxied to their Herald Square hotel, and there Grump was given more of the concocted champagne that made him vulnerable but not unconscious. He was able to remember the incident and actually escape later as Thaw slept. Again, the whip and riding crop were used. Gump's family would not be bought off. He was charged, found insane, and jailed in Kirkbride Asylum in Philadelphia. In 1924, he was again found sane and freed. Thaw died in 1947 of a heart attack in Miami, 10 days after his 76th birthday. He is buried in the family area of Allegheny Cemetery in Pittsburgh. Evelyn Nesbit was able to lever all of this publicity into helpful successes. In film and performing top bill in dance performances and stage. She married her then dance partner, Jack Clifford, less than 1 year after the 1916 divorce from Thaw. However, Jack left her in 1918, being dissatisfied with being second billed to her, or as he put it, being Mr. Evelyn Nesbit. In the 1920s, Evelyn purchased a West 50th Street Manhattan tea room, aka Speakeasy, which became extremely successful. But the times had taken their toll, and in 1925, she attempted suicide by drinking disinfectant after an alcoholic bender. The doctor who treated her noted the only thing that saved her from the poisoning was a stomach full of gin. Very successful in film, Russell was included in 6 of her films between 1914 and 1922. Her son Russell went on to be a pilot and a test pilot for Douglas Aviation. In 1955, Evelyn was hired as a technical director for the film Girl in the Red Velvet Swing, a film about her, which had been pulled together from the court transcriptions into a book and in the process of being made into a film starring Joan Collins as herself, Ray Milland as Stanford White, and Farley Granger as Henry Thaw. Evelyn was paid $10,000 for her support. In June of 1956, Evelyn suffered a stroke and was confined to a nursing home in the city she lived in at the time, Santa Monica, where she died in 1967. She was 82. She's buried at Holy Cross Cemetery. The 1927 film Ragtime, starring Jimmy Cagney, also included allusion to this story. Norman Mailer played Stanford White. Elizabeth McGovern played Evelyn. Stanford White had been buried in the Smith family plot, Long Island, where his wife, Bessie, joined him in time. During his autopsy, it was discovered he suffered from advanced Bright's disease, incipient tuberculosis, and acute nephritis. His liver and kidneys would have taken him out within a year anyway. Charles Samuels was the author who compiled the court transcripts into the book Girl in the Red Velvet Swing that was then crafted into the screenplay. You can find this film on the Turner Classic Movie Channel. Evelyn Nesbit had been the most famous Gibson girl ever, a penniless child labor victim to art model, to the most famous model and dancer in the Gilded Age, on the Gilded Stage. You can't make this stuff up. But do you believe it all? I'll let you decide. Thank you for hanging out with me today. Thank you for all my subscribers, those of you that buy coffees and readings and share your input. This is another show I think I'd like to discuss further with my friend Andrew Zabrun III because of the insane asylums involved, he being a lifelong resident of Erie County in upstate New York. I hope you're having a lovely day. I'm going to pour myself a glass of wine and continue editing this video. This is Joyce at Medusa Was Framed, thanking you for joining me, thanking you for listening the whole time, and thanking my sisters at Unguru, Melanie, Michelle, and Buffy. Till the next video.